What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the Cutlass Board Games channel. I'm Keith. I make board games for a living, and we do a lot of stuff like that on this channel. But also, I've started to do more Magic the Gathering content, and what a better time than to weigh in on the recent bans in Standard. Now, prior to this, we had a big event which had 8 out of 8 decks were playing Red X aggressive strategies, and because of that, a lot of the community then spent a lot of time speculating on what cards would be banned. A lot of cards on this list came up in that discussion. I want to quickly talk about what kind of reasons and what kind of explanations make sense for a lot of these cards being banned, why there is so many cards. A lot of people were expecting maybe one or two things. A lot of people thought they were going to be really restrained. Standard, for a very, very long time, has been a format that has had very, very few bans, if none. And so it's going to be interesting to see exactly, why these cards were chosen. But also, what does this indicate about the design team and what it means for Standard going forwards? And that's kind of the main part that I want to, pitch in about. So stick around for that, because I think that is what it makes my voice unique from others. But let's talk about what cards they pick. First is Corey Steelcutter. This is a card that generates tokens that have haste and can attack as long as you're casting 2 spells every turn. This is a very, very strong card. It's very difficult to get rid of. And it's, the Is It Prowess deck relies a lot on the Corey Steelcutter to keep pressure, because you don't have to be playing threats. You play the Steelcutter on turn 2, and then you can just be playing removal for the rest of the game, and those monks that you're creating still create a continuous attacking pressure, which is kind of brutal to deal with. If you're unable to, effectively remove that artifact, you're going to be kind of run over. The next one is Abuelo's Awakening. So this is from a kind of a reanimator style Omniscience deck, where the goal is to try and turn 4, turn 5, play Omniscience, and then, kind of combo at them in the game. People were calling for Omniscience to be banned, but Omniscience was just printed into a set that is supposed to be here for a long time, and which meant that they intended for Omniscience to exist. And the ban of Abuelo's Awakening is interesting to me because it doesn't remove that effect from the game. They just released Yuna from the Final Fantasy set, which also returns enchantments to play. Abuelo's Awakening also turns it into a creature, but we have these gigantic saga creatures like Summon Bahamut, which can be doing the same thing if you needed to reanimate a creature enchantment. Yuna can just as easily return Omniscience to play. So I'm wondering if it's we don't want this to be a turn 4 strategy. We want this to be a turn 5 strategy because the aggro deck's enough time to get through. It's a bit harder to figure out what's going on with that one. And I will talk about this a bit more later on, but I have a hunch that the decks that work dominant right now is why they're specifically targeting those, so that the meta feels fresh, rather than necessarily these cards were dominant. And so Monstrous Rage, which was in every deck in the top 8 at the last event, is very strong, but from a design perspective, there's a card, I'm blanking, I think it's called Spark something. It's a red 1-drop creature with trample and haste. It is a 3/1, and you sacrifice at the beginning of your end step. Mathematically, Monstrous Rage and this card are very, very similar in how it deals with the problems and things. The one upside is that the token enchantment that Monstrous Rage provides, buff to the creature, can persist for additional turns. And how much more powerful is that realistically than Lightning Bolt, than other things that cost 1 red and deals 3 damage, is not that much. You're requiring having a creature, but the thing is the amount of pressure that it provides over time, and in combination with Heartfire Hero, can be a lot. Heartfire Hero also being banned is the same thing. Basically, make a big enough creature that there's no removal good enough to get rid of it, in a way that doesn't hurt you so much that you cannot recover from winning the game. Because Heartfire Hero deals damage when it dies, that you don't want to use a type of removal that kills that creature. Up the Beanstalk is not a surprise. Up the Beanstalk was incredibly dominant. There's too many cards that say play this for less, but its casting cost is above 5, so you will draw a card, but you're not spending the whole 5 mana to draw a card. Up the Beanstalk is kind of... should have just been worded, if you spend 5 mana to cast a spell, draw a card. Otherwise, it's just kind of insane. It's been played in every format. There was a deck in Modern where you would just play a bunch of the Evoke creatures and draw tons of cards from that, which is just... it's busted. I think Up the Beanstalk was a mistake. I think all the other cards on this list are not design mistakes. But again, I'll elaborate in a bit. Hopeless Nightmare is a really interesting one. Hopeless Nightmare was definitely one that I thought should have been put on the ban list. It's really, really strong. It does way too much compared to Thoughtseize, which makes you take damage to remove a card from your opponent's hand. We're trading off, and we're making them get to choose, but also they take the damage. But then also I have a permanent in play that I can bargain when I cast Beseech the Mirror, that I can sacrifice to Braids to make my opponent take damage. That when it is sacrificed, I can then get card advantage by scrying. This card just has too many lines of text on it. It's too easy to abuse, by bouncing back to your hand, and it's just, it's strong. I don't want to say that Hopeless Nightmare is also a design mistake. I just think that it's probably too cheaply costed for the standard format, but for other formats I think it's fine, which I think is perhaps the problem. It's just slightly too fast for standard. And then This Town Ain't Big Enough is part of the Omniscience combo deck, but it's also in the permanence bounce thing, which is where Hopeless Nightmare kind of thing, because you can recur it basically, put it back in your hand, cast it again, which is another one of the reasons why it's so strong, because it's so cheaply to cast and you can recur it so easily. You're getting so much more advantage out of it than your opponents are. I think this one makes sense because of an annoying play pattern where being able to abuse Hopeless Nightmare, playing it too many times, your opponent's just like, sure, yeah, I'm just going to card a card, I'm losing all this life, you're attacking me for 2, and that can feel frustrating. Now let's talk about wider things, right? So aggro was incredibly dominant in this format, and we have had seasons of red before, and usually that's an indication that there is not effective enough removal in the other colors to be able to deal with these problems. Sheltered by Ghosts is possibly the best removal spell for an aggro strategy. Like, the whole thing is that my guy's protected, it has lifelink now, and I remove one of your things. But all of the decks that could or need to be able to recover from a red deck wins or an is a strategy is susceptible to the creature just being bounced, being bolted in response, so that the enchantment doesn't land and doesn't do anything. And even when it does, you eat their thing, they get it back after you kill the creature that is sheltered by ghosts. And so unfortunately, whilst yes, it is a very, very strong card, it's a card that's better at keeping your tempo at being in the lead rather than actually helping you recover. And there's not a lot of other good cards that, once your opponent has a little bit of a lead, allows you to deal with this thing. Heartfire Hero is a really interesting way of looking at this, because Heartfire Hero says the bigger my toughness gets, the harder it is for you to effectively remove me and stuff like that. Whereas we have... I'm blanking on a lot of card names today, but there's a adventure for black and a colorless that gives something -3/-3 and you gain 2 life. This is a fantastic removal for Heartfire Hero, but it's a sorcery speed. It makes it really hard to, if it was an instant, it would make a lot of difference. For example, Moment of Craving, which is -2/-2 instant speed, gain 2 life. But if you reduce Heartfire Hero's power when you are killing it, it's not going to deal as much damage to you on the resolution. And so there needs to be either more things that effectively deal with an aggro threat, and allows more different colors to be able to survive. Like red is not going to be able to ever do anything more than just deal damage to it, which means that red is always going to take damage. Black is usually just destroy, but sometimes you can get the minuses on there. And then like bounce in blue and then exile in white, right? The Into the Floodmoor is really, really good, but it's not buying you all that much time. It doesn't get rid of it forever. You still need to be able to do something that's going to help you stabilize. And that's kind of the problem with some of the aggro deck, with even the Omniscience combo deck and the bounce fairies hopeless nightmare kind of deck, is that they all have this kind of immense pressure just before turn 4. The Omniscience one is slightly different because it just goes, do you see Omniscience in my discard pile? Then yes, you should be scared. But they've all been like really consistent and dominant for a while. And then how do we solve this problem? Normally what happens is they can plan a set so that if a dominant strategy emerges, they already have something that will meaningfully interact with it coming up. So you can be like, okay, we've actually seen examples of this where Deathrite Shaman came out in Return to Ravnica. Deathrite Shaman gave a lot of ability to have a really strong graveyard interacting synergy, but because fetch lanes weren't in standard format, its tapping for mana wasn't that strong, but it being able to deal 2 damage every single turn pretty much was pretty good. And then they created Tomic, which came out in the set after also, where it was basically like cards in graveyards can't be targeted, lands in graveyards can't be targeted. And then they actually said like this was designed to be able to meaningfully interact with Deathrite Shaman. And so we know from evidence that they do try and plan solutions to these kinds of problems. However, that, Return to Ravnica was a long time ago. I have a hunch that the design team sentiment has changed around how things are being done. And because back then, how long something was in Standard was much shorter. And this is kind of the heart of my argument. Many years ago, Standard was a much shorter format, and people continually complained that the rotation happened too quick. And they, brought out Pioneer, and they're like, look, your cards no longer become useless. Here's another format you can kind of play, and it didn't change enough. And then they go, okay, what if we made the Standard rotation much longer? And this is a direct problem. And this is exactly why we're seeing so many Standard bans like this. Because the format is so long, these cards, Corey Steelcutter, really only just came out. It's supposed to be in the Standard format for a very long time. Now it has to be banned because otherwise they will be having to dealing with it for a long time. And what it means is that as Standard is becoming a larger set included format, it's going to become more and more like Modern, where you do have to pay a lot of attention to the ban lists because they are going to have that as the only release valve to change any kind of dominant strategies. Because what could happen is they could print a bunch of stuff that meaningfully shuts down Corey Steelcutter, and they go, well, maybe it's not going to be that dominant anymore, we'll unban it. I think that is unlikely. We don't really see unbans in Standard. It stays banned, and then it rotates out, and then they just let it go. So I think it's a philosophy thing. Like the main question that I wanted to answer here, does bans in Standard mean that is a failure of the design team? Because way back when Smuggler's Copter got banned, everyone was like, this card was a mistake. The design team should have known this card was so powerful and they should not have printed it. And I don't think that is what it is like here. Every now and again, something will become more powerful than you could expect, or a strategy could exist that you weren't anticipating, and that's fine. That's going to happen, right? That's why there's a team of people doing testing. That's why there's a team of people doing design. They're supposed to check each other notes, so this kind of stuff happens. And that sometimes it'll slip through the cracks a little bit. 7 bans is not something slipping through the cracks. 7 bans is them not being able to meaningfully have great control over Standard because of its size, and that they need to ban things to stop it from becoming a stale format by having the exact same decks present for such a long period of time. And I kind of get that. It's more like a format oversight problem. Like, yes, Corey Steelcutter is strong, but it's like a very fun card. Like, they designed a very fun card to play. I enjoy playing Corey Steelcutter. I play in a lot of formats that aren't Standard because I think the card is really interesting. It it makes me really plan ahead in how I'm effectively using my cards in both dealing with my opponent's things, but also proactively making threats. And I think that's really interesting. And so they made a really fun card. I don't think they should be punished for that, for it also just being very powerful, because for cards to be fun, they have to be powerful in a certain amount of way. And for people, fun is not going to be the same amount of fun forever. You come, you realize it's broken, you get to play for a bit, you have fun, it gets banned, you now need to find a new toy to play with. And I think that's also fine. But I don't want Standard to be that format. My hot take, as a person who has played Standard in formats where there was no cards banned, is that you should be able to purchase boosters in the Standard format, open all of the cards, and be able to play with all of those cards. If you open a card that is banned in the format, it feels like you've wasted your money. So that's my complaint about it. I do believe Standard should be a format with no bans, but it should still rotate faster. And it's crazy to me that they changed Standard to rotate slower, because people were complaining that their cards rotate too fast. Why the fuck does Wizards care? They make more money if people have to be buying boosters to keep current with the format. But then, oh no, if people stop playing Standard, who will care? No one's playing Standard. I literally did a video about this recently, where in Sydney, there's like 3 events for Standard F&M. I think that was, like 40, 50 back in Innistrad Return of Ravnica, when I did like the most of my competitive playing. Now it's just Commander. If Standard is a dead format, then it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter if it rotates quickly. It shouldn't matter if you're taking risks and you're making crazy cards and you're creating these fun moments, right? Way back when, I played Legacy very seriously, and what would happen is a Standard format would come out, you would look at all the cards in the Standard format, and you would go, one card is relevant for Legacy. Now, Standard comes out, and we go, cool, what made it onto the ban list, and can I make a Legacy deck out of that? Probably could play Corey Steelcutter. There's probably a Grixis aggro deck that can play this card. What about Up the Beanstalk? Force of Will lets me pitch a blue card, counterspell, and then draw a card? Right? So them taking big risks, I think, has great value. I think it is part of what you want to stop Magic from being a boring game where none of the cards are interesting or the format stays stale, because stuff comes out in Standard first, and then it needs to prove that it is powerful enough to be worthy of being played in Eternal formats. Otherwise, the Eternal formats never have any new cards. They stop being interesting, unless if they're printing really crazy stuff in sealed product like Commander product, like where Trinum Nemesis came from. It's going to be boring and stale. I think 7 Standard bans is good for maintaining a healthy meta environment. Standard will be still fun to play because these gross cards won't be in them, and you get to play cool and different stuff. You get to focus on some Final Fantasy strategies. That's fine. Is Standard having so many sets a big problem? It's hard to tell. I think this is the first sign that maybe it does need to be taken down, shortened just like a little bit. Everyone was like, oh my god, Sheoldred is going to be legal in this format for 100 million years. And then they're like, wait, actually, on turn 4, playing a 4-5 that doesn't gain me life immediately and just deals 2 damage to my opponent before they kill me isn't good. So banning Heartfire Hero and Monstrous Rage and Corey Steelcutter might mean that Sheoldred is playable again, and people start to complain about how good Sheoldred is. But who knows? I like to do a lot of speculation stuff about how the game is run, how the game is designed, because I think that's very interesting. I've designed a lot of stuff in my time, and when I was playing Magic very seriously, the sentiment was always that Wizards of the Coast has no idea what they're doing. Wizards of the Coast is very greedy, all they want is money, and the Wizards of the Coast design team is failing and making mistakes all the time. But actually, from my perspective, the last couple of years, the design team has just been kind of making bangers after bangers. I really enjoy Alchemy. I am Alchemy's greatest soldier. Everyone hates Alchemy. Fuck you. Alchemy is great. I will fight you on this one. And then the Final Fantasy set. I don't care about the IP at all, but the Final Fantasy set is very fun to play. A lot of the cards in it are very interesting and very well designed. The 2-drop Esper card that flashes back to become a Saga is possibly my favorite card of the set. I think it is very interesting. I think it is very well designed. And I'm really, curious to see what other cool cards catch my attention. And I think that sometimes maybe they don't get credit for the wins that they have because these look like losses. Maybe they're not. Maybe it's just a way to keep the format fresh. And that's all there is to it.